no secret that a lot less people are playing the Alliance than they are playing the Horde. On some servers, this goes as far as a ratio of 1 in 5 players being Alliance on a specific server. The main complaint is that the Alliance is boring because it's literally humans. Dwarves, short humans, gnomes, really short humans, Kultirans, really big humans, Vorgans, savage humans, and only the Night Elves, Ren, and the Pandaren are kinda sprinkled in, but even they are not really that different. This has been a pretty big point in the community, but really, what is the solution to this? How can the Alliance be made more interesting in the future? So you might have heard already of the statistics, and that is that at the moment, across pretty much any server in the region, the Horde is the more numerous factions. On some server, this is a slight difference. On some, this is as crazy as like 85% of the players being Horde across the entire server. In fact, this is really the main reason why cross-faction feature was introduced. It was never really about the lore, but it was done in order for players to be actually able to find an instance without having to wait an hour in the queue. Furthermore, most of the hardcore aspects of the game are all Horde dominated, which seriously makes it hard to be an Alliance player on most servers. Because of this, the narrative was drawn that the Alliance is just too bland, is just too boring, but I think this is just one part of the story, because I feel like the players migrating to one faction really has more to do with gameplay, better ratios, as well as this being a snowball effect. So imagine there is a slight difference in the player count. It is harder to find groups, so Alliance transfers to Horde, which causes an even bigger difference. Then that draws even more players to faction change, and ultimately this leads to a pretty big imbalance, which pretty much makes it unplayable. However, I can't also really dismiss the point that the Alliance is in fact boring, and this is a pretty popular sentiment across the entire community. What is really interesting is that originally the Alliance was the dominant faction, but I feel like this might have just been a product of the time when World of Warcraft was released, as really, at that point in time, there was a bit more clear distinction of the Alliance being the good guys, while Horde being the monsters, the bad guys. Of course, it was never really that black and white, but it definitely leaned more towards that contrast. It was a lot more simpler. Originally, the Horde was mainly the monsters, so orcs, undead, tauren, trolls. All of them were drastically different from each other, very different races, and some were kinda unique. Also, at the time, you couldn't play a paladin, but all this was changed with the introduction of the Blood Elves and the Blood Knights, and over the years, there really was no distinction or an advantage to a single faction. Now, over the years, new races were added, things were changed. However, let's be real, the Alliance is still kinda boring. When you imagine it, literally every race is just a human in a way. The only real difference are the Draenei, that are a race of their own, and the Pandaren, that are also available to the Horde as well. The allied races improved the scene a bit when they were added, but literally for the Alliance, it was only the Void Elves that made a significant difference and that were kinda unique in any way. But I mean, seriously, just think about it. The Alliance can literally be summed up into the humans and the human derivatives. You, of course, have the humans themselves, then you have the dwarves and the gnomes. I mean, sure, they're the earthen, and even though technically they're related to the Vrykels, so they're pretty much the exact same race, they are the Titan Forge, but seriously, both the dwarves and the gnomes are literally just short and shorter humans. Then you have the allied race, the Kultirans, which are literally just gigantic humans, and you have the Vorgen, which I gotta admit, they are different, but nonetheless, they're still half human, they have the human form. The only real difference are the Night Elves, but they're humanoid as well, and they're very much similar to humans, even though their lore is drastically different. Now, I'm not saying that the solution to fix this is to introduce just crazy alien bug races with 18 legs to the Alliance, as that would make them more interesting, but let's be real, humans, dwarves, and elves are pretty much the most boring fantasy concept ever. I mean, just sit down and try to think of a fantasy medieval based game that doesn't have these three races, the humans, the dwarves, and the elves. I literally can't think the single one off the top of my head. It's just way too saturated with these races. It is a bit different in today's gaming when you can play the bad guys, but before it was actually rare there that you could play the undead or the orcs or the so-called generic bad guys, but you could always play the humans in pretty much any fantasy game. On the other hand, I don't think the Alliance being boring is just a product of the races and how different they are. I think that might even be a lesser factor, but in my opinion, it is the way their storyline has been pretty much since Classic, and this might just be the biggest factor why so few people are playing the Alliance. Just think about it, almost always the Alliance have been the good guys, the defenders, the more noble faction, the ones taking the high road. Sure, there were a few incidents, some crimes, some bad apples here and there, but when you look at the overall picture, the Alliance are generally the good guys. I mean, the Horde literally had two massive civil wars in the span of like a few years' time, as Blizzard recently confirmed with the timeline. The Horde had Garrosh that essentially attempted to conquer the entire planet for his true Horde and his own supremacy. Then he attempted to create an Iron Horde to conquer the world once again. Then the Alliance joined this conflict and actually fought their way right into the heart of Orgrimmar, and then they were like, we can end you if you want to, but of course we're not going to do that because of course we're the good guys, we're going to take the high road. A few years later, Garrosh is a little baby compared to the new war chief Sylvanas that was put in power by the machinations of a crazy dead god from the Shadowlands, and then she starts to see how she can outdo the bombing of Terramore, and yeah, she definitely gets, let's say, a bit creative. Then Sylvanas unleashes a crazy war on the Alliance yet again, destroys an entire race, an entire capital. Then the Alliance has a bit of a retaliation moment when they attack Undercity, but ultimately they don't really do anything, and then they join the civil war on one side of the Horde once again. They talk about how they're fighting for Azeroth, even help Sourfang once again being the good guys, and they pretty much gain nothing from the war itself. Most of the gains they got was just them recovering territory that they had lost previously. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all these storylines are bad, I'm purposefully over-exaggerating, but I think you can see my point that the Alliance is really leaning far too much to one side. I'm not saying that they need to be all about chaos now, civil war, that they need like 3 civil wars to make up for the difference, but I think a middle ground can be found somewhere with them getting some unrest, maybe for once being the bad guy in the overall storyline. There is actually a lot of potential right now with the most popular speculation of the Alliance turning bad under Tyrellian, and he is still a mysterious figure. We don't really know much about him. When you think about it, with this new time skip, Tyrellian has essentially been ruling the Alliance longer than Anduin has, and Anduin is missing, so this is almost Thrall and Garrosh all over again around the time of Cataclysm. And if you remember at the start, Garrosh was not actually a bad guy, so we could really go down the rabbit hole of Tyrellian using the Alliance to start a light invasion, which could split the Alliance into 2 factions. There could be a light related race to this entire matter, and just a whole bunch of things. With the Dragon Isles and the possible awakening of Azeroth, all these new storylines and the light and the void being in the background, there are seriously a ton of opportunities to just change everything. In my opinion, if done right with the entire light bad storyline, a lot more nuance can be added to the Alliance, and there could be new races, more choices, more vague characters, and for once in the Warcraft history, the Alliance not being the noble defenders. Thank you for watching. Check out how close was Garrosh to conquering the entire planet by clicking on the screen, and check out Doronsmovies Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time.